The rider appeared just after sunrise, coming slowly over the eastern ridge with everything he owned tied behind his saddle. From a distance, he looked like any tired cowboy searching for water and a warm meal. But when 14-year-old Henry Carter recognized the faded black hat and the gray horse beneath him, he dropped the bucket in his hands and ran toward the ranch gate. "Ma," he shouted, "he came back." Clara Carter turned from the clothesline and stared across the wide Montana valley. The morning sun rested on the snowy peaks beyond Willow Creek, and a soft wind moved through the tall spring grass. For months, Clara had looked toward that same trail, wondering whether the old cowboy would ever return. Now he was there. Elias Mercer rode toward Carter Ranch with his shoulders bent from the long journey. His silver beard had grown thicker, his brown coat was covered with dust, and his old horse, Ranger, walked with slow and careful steps. Henry threw open the gate before Elias reached it. "You took long enough," the boy said, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. Elias stopped Ranger and looked down at him. "I reckon I did." Henry smiled, but his eyes were wet. Clara walked toward them more slowly. She was 38, with dark auburn hair tied in a loose braid and a tired but gentle face shaped by years of work and loss. Around her neck hung the wedding ring of her late husband, Daniel Carter. Elias removed his hat. "Morning, Clara." "Morning, Elias." Neither of them knew what else to say. 7 months earlier, Elias had arrived at Carter Ranch during a winter storm. He had helped Clara save her cattle, repaired the barn roof, taught Henry how to handle a frightened horse, and stayed until the snow melted. Then one morning, he had saddled Ranger and left without promising to return. Clara had told herself that old cowboys belonged to the trail. Henry had never believed it. As Elias dismounted, Clara noticed the heavy load behind his saddle. A rolled blanket, 2 worn saddlebags, a coffee pot, an old rifle case, extra clothes, and a small wooden box were tied carefully with leather rope. This was not the pack of a man passing through for one night. It was everything he had. Henry noticed it too. "You moving somewhere?" the boy asked. Elias looked toward the ranch house. "I haven't decided yet." Clara stepped closer to Ranger and gently touched the horse's neck. "You both look hungry." "That happens after 3 weeks on the trail." "Then come inside." The kitchen smelled of fresh bread, fried potatoes, and strong coffee. Sunlight entered through the small windows and rested across the wooden table. Above the stone fireplace hung Daniel's photograph. Elias stopped before it and removed his hat again. Clara noticed. He always showed respect to the man whose family he had once protected. Henry pulled out a chair. "Sit down. Ma made enough food for 6 men. "I made enough for ranch work," Clara corrected. "Same thing." Elias sat at the table, while Clara poured coffee into a dark tin cup. When she placed it before him, he stared at it. It was the same cup he had used during the winter. A small dent marked one side, and the handle had been repaired with thin wire. "You kept it," he said. Clara returned to the stove. "No one else wanted it." Henry laughed. "That isn't true. She wouldn't let anyone touch it." Clara gave her son a warning look, but Elias smiled. He wrapped both hands around the warm cup. For a few minutes they spoke about simple things. The cattle were healthy. The creek had risen after the snow melted. Henry's young horse, Copper, had finally stopped kicking at the saddle. Then Clara sat across from Elias. "Where have you been?" "Idaho, Wyoming, a few towns south of here." "Doing what?" "Looking for work." "Did you find any?" "Some." His answer was quiet. Henry leaned forward. "Then why did you come back?" Elias looked into his coffee. The room became still. "I kept writing because that's what I've always done," he said. "Whenever one trail ended, I found another. Whenever a ranch didn't need me, I moved on." He paused, but every town started feeling the same. Clara watched his face. Elias continued. "I'd sleep in a bunkhouse or beside a fire. I'd work a few weeks, collect my pay, and leave before anyone knew me well enough to miss me. Henry frowned. That sounds lonely. It was easier. Easier than what? Elias slowly lifted his eyes. Easier than belonging somewhere and losing it. Clara lowered her gaze. She understood those words better than Henry did. After Daniel died in a riding accident, she had nearly sold the ranch. Every room reminded her of him. Every fence post carried a memory, but she stayed because Henry needed a home. Elias had done the opposite. He had spent most of his life leaving before anything could become a home. After breakfast, Elias carried his belongings into the yard. "I can sleep in the barn," he said. Clara looked at him. "You will do no such thing. I don't want to trouble you. You repaired half this ranch last winter. That doesn't mean you owe me a room." Clara walked toward the house. "Come with me." She led him through the hallway and stopped before the spare bedroom. When she opened the door, Elias remained frozen in the doorway. Nothing had changed. The narrow bed was covered with the same blue quilt. His old wool blanket was folded across the foot. The wooden chair still stood beside the window. A small horseshoe he had found during the winter remained on the shelf. Even the curtains were tied back the way he had left them. Elias looked around slowly. "You kept the room like this?" Clara nodded. "For 7 months. Yes. Why?" She took a breath. "Henry said you would return. And you believed him." Clara's expression softened. "I wanted to." Elias lowered his eyes. "I never asked you to wait for me. No one waited." She stepped closer. "But no one took your place either." The old cowboy looked toward the bed, but he did not enter. "I don't know how long I'll stay." Clara's face became serious. "You don't need to know today." Henry appeared behind them, carrying Elias' wooden box. "I already put Ranger beside Copper," he said. "They remember each other." Elias glanced at the boy. Henry carried the box into the room and placed it beside the dresser. Then he turned. "You can leave again if you want." Clara looked at him in surprise. Henry continued, "But I think you came back because you're tired of leaving." The words struck Elias harder than the boy understood. That afternoon, he worked around the ranch without being asked. He repaired a broken gate, cleaned the water trough, replaced a loose board on the chicken house, and showed Henry how to check Copper's hoof for stones. By sunset, it felt as though he had never been gone. After supper, Clara found Elias standing beside Ranger in the barn. His saddle was still on a wooden rail, ready to be lifted onto the horse at sunrise. "You planning to leave tomorrow?" she asked. Elias kept his back toward her. "I don't know." Clara walked closer. "Then why is your saddle ready?" He stared at it for a long time. "Habit." Outside, Henry laughed as Copper chased him along the fence. Warm light shone from the ranch house windows. The smell of wood smoke drifted through the evening air. Elias reached for the saddle. For one painful moment, Clara thought he was preparing to leave. Instead, he carried it to the far end of the barn and placed it inside the tack room. Then he closed the door. Clara said nothing. Elias looked toward the ranch house. "I may need a few days before I know what I'm doing." "You have them. And if it takes longer." Clara smiled gently. "Then you have longer." That night, Elias lay beneath the blue quilt, listening to the wind move through the cottonwood trees. For the first time in many years, his boots were not beside the bed, ready for a quick departure. Downstairs, his tin cup hung beside the fireplace. In the barn, Ranger slept safely near Copper. And in the room across the hallway, Henry had left his door open, as though he feared the old cowboy might disappear before morning. Elias closed his eyes. He had returned to Carter Ranch, carrying everything he owned. But before sleep came, one question remained in his heart. Had he returned only because he had nowhere else to go, or had the lonely trail finally brought him home? Morning came quietly over Carter Ranch, carrying the smell of wet grass, pine wood, and fresh coffee through the open kitchen window. Elias woke before sunrise, but for several minutes he remained beneath the blue quilt, listening to the sounds around him. A rooster called from behind the barn. Copper stamped inside the corral. Downstairs, Clara moved pans across the stove while Henry whistled badly as he filled the water buckets. Elias smiled before he could stop himself. He dressed, placed his faded black hat on his head, and walked outside. Henry was struggling to lift a heavy sack of grain into the wagon. "You planning to feed every horse in Montana?" Elias asked. Henry dropped the sack with a tired breath. "I was doing fine." "I could see that." Elias lifted the sack and placed it in the wagon with little effort. Henry frowned. "One day I'll be stronger than you. That day may come sooner if you stop trying to prove it every morning." Clara stepped onto the porch carrying 3 cups of coffee. "You two have been arguing for less than 5 minutes." "We aren't arguing," Henry said. "He's teaching." Elias accepted his cup. That is a generous way of describing it. The next several days passed with a peaceful rhythm. Elias repaired a section of fence near Willow Creek, sharpened the old tools in the barn, and helped Henry train Copper to cross running water without fear. Clara never asked how long he planned to stay. Elias never mentioned leaving. Each evening, his saddle remained locked inside the tack room. On Saturday, the people of Meadow Ridge gathered outside the small white church for their spring social. Long wooden tables were covered with bread, pies, beans, roasted meat, and jars of lemonade. Children ran beneath the cottonwood trees while a group of ranchers played fiddle music near the church steps. Clara carried a basket of biscuits toward the tables. Henry walked beside Elias, explaining which pies were worth eating and which ones should be avoided. "Mrs. Dalton's apple pie is good," Henry whispered, "but stay away from her peach pie." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "I don't know what she puts in it, but even the chickens refuse to eat it." Elias laughed. Clara turned at the sound. It was not the quiet, careful laugh he used when trying to be polite. It was warm and honest. She realized she had not heard him laugh that way before. Reverend Thomas Reed approached them with a young woman beside him. "Clara, I'd like you to meet our new schoolteacher." The woman looked to be about 28. She had kind brown eyes, light brown hair pinned neatly behind her head, and a pale green dress beneath a cream-colored shawl. "My name is Rebecca Hayes," she said. Clara shook her hand. "Welcome to Meadow Ridge." "We are glad someone finally agreed to teach Henry," Elias said. Henry looked offended. "I can read better than half the ranch hands here." "That is not the proud claim you think it is." Rebecca smiled. When Elias heard her last name, his expression changed. "Hayes." She turned toward him. "Yes." Elias removed his hat. "Was your grandfather named Josiah Hayes?" Rebecca stared at him. "He was. Did you know him?" The music and laughter around them seemed to fade from Elias' attention. His weathered face became still. "I rode with him many years ago." Rebecca stepped closer. "My mother said he worked cattle trails before she was born, but he never spoke much about those years." "That sounds like Josiah." They moved to a quiet bench beneath a large tree. Clara and Henry sat nearby while Elias looked toward the distant mountains. "It was 25 years ago," he began. "Josiah and I were moving cattle through northern Wyoming. A storm came down from the mountains faster than anything I had ever seen." Rebecca listened closely. "My horse fell while we were crossing an icy slope. My leg was trapped beneath the saddle, and the other riders had already disappeared through the snow." Elias rested both hands on his knees. Josiah could have kept going. No one would have blamed him. Instead, he turned back. "What happened?" Henry asked. "He dug me out with his bare hands. Then he gave me his coat and walked beside my horse for nearly 10 miles. Rebecca's eyes filled with emotion. "He saved your life." Elias nodded. "And before we separated years later, he gave me something. He asked me to find his granddaughter and place it in her hands." Rebecca looked at him in disbelief. You have something that belonged to my grandfather. I've carried it for more than 20 years. Why didn't you send it? I tried to find you. I asked in every town where I stopped. I checked churches, schools, and county offices. Your family had moved west, but no one knew where. Rebecca lowered her eyes. My mother and I changed towns many times after my father died. Elias looked toward Clara and Henry. I began to think I had failed him. Rebecca's voice became soft. But you kept it. A promise does not end because the road becomes difficult. The following morning, Rebecca arrived at Carter Ranch in a small wagon. Elias met her at the front porch and led her inside. Clara poured coffee while Henry watched Elias enter the spare bedroom. He returned carrying the small wooden box that had been tied behind his saddle when he arrived. He placed it on the kitchen table. For the first time, Clara understood why he had guarded it so carefully. Elias opened the box and removed a leather journal wrapped in faded blue cloth. This belonged to Josiah. Rebecca took it with trembling hands. The brown leather cover was cracked with age, but Elias had protected every page from rain and dust. Rebecca slowly opened it. Inside were stories of long cattle drives, mountain storms, friendships, and lonely nights beneath the stars. Josiah had written about the birth of his daughter and the granddaughter he hoped to meet one day. Near the final page, a sealed envelope slipped onto the table. Written across the front were 4 words. For Rebecca, my granddaughter. Rebecca covered her mouth with one hand. I never knew this existed. Elias stepped away from the table. You should read it alone. No, Rebecca said, please stay. She carefully broke the old seal and unfolded the letter. The room became silent. As Rebecca read, tears rolled down her cheeks. At last, she lifted her eyes. He wrote that he was sorry he might never see me grow up. Clara reached across the table and held her hand. Rebecca continued. He said land and money disappear, but kindness can live through people for generations. Her voice broke. He hoped I would become a teacher. He wanted me to help children who believed they were forgotten. Henry looked at Elias. You carried that letter all those years. Elias nodded. Rebecca pressed the page against her heart. You gave me a piece of my family. Elias looked toward the window. Your grandfather gave me my life. Returning a letter was the least I could do. Rebecca stood and embraced him. Elias froze in surprise before gently placing one hand against her shoulder. For many years, he had believed the promise was another weight he had to carry alone. Now, watching Rebecca smile through her tears, he understood that some burdens became gifts when they finally reached the right hands. During the weeks that followed, Elias became known throughout Meadow Ridge. Young ranch hands came to Carter Ranch asking for help with riding, rope work, and horse care. Elias never accepted money. Knowledge was given to me, he told them. It is only right that I pass it on. Henry remained beside him during every lesson. One evening, they sat together on the pasture fence, while Copper and Ranger grazed beneath the orange sunset. Can I ask you something? Henry said. You usually do whether I allow it or not. Henry smiled. Did you ever have children? Elias' expression grew distant. No. Did you want them? The old cowboy watched Ranger pull at the grass. Once. What happened? I spent too many years believing there would always be more time. Henry looked down at his boots. I don't think of you as a visitor. Elias turned toward him. Henry continued. When you left last winter, the ranch felt empty again. Ma tried not to show it, but I could tell. Henry, I am not asking you to replace my father. The boy looked directly into his eyes. No one could do that. But I think a family can have room for someone new without forgetting the person who came before. Elias could not answer. Henry placed one hand on his shoulder. You belong here. That night, Elias sat alone on the porch. Stars covered the sky, and the quiet sound of Willow Creek drifted through the darkness. Clara came outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. She sat beside him. "Henry spoke to you," she said. "He did. He has never learned when to keep his thoughts to himself." "I am glad he hasn't." Clara looked toward the barn. "Are you still afraid to stay?" Elias took a slow breath. "Every home I ever cared about was taken from me. My parents died when I was young. The ranch where I grew up was sold. Friends disappeared down different trails. After a while, leaving first seemed easier." Clara's voice was gentle. "Leaving first does not stop the pain. No, it only makes certain you face it alone." Elias stared through the window at Henry, who sat at the kitchen table reading Josiah Hayes's journal. The warm light surrounded him. Elias lowered his coffee. "I don't know how to become part of a family." Clara looked at him. "You already have." The next morning, Elias entered the kitchen and found Clara and Henry waiting beside a large sheet of paper. Henry quickly covered it with both hands. "What are you hiding?" Elias asked. "Nothing. That looks like a large piece of nothing." Clara smiled. "We have something to show you." Henry slowly removed his hands. On the paper was a careful drawing of Carter Ranch. Near Willow Creek, beneath 3 tall cottonwood trees, he had drawn a small cabin. Elias stared at it. Clara placed one hand on the table. "You have spent your whole life helping other people build homes." She looked into his weathered blue eyes. "Now we want to build one for you." Elias stared at the hand-drawn cabin for a long time. The little building stood near Willow Creek, with smoke rising from its chimney and a narrow porch facing the mountains. Henry had even drawn Ranger beside the front steps. Elias touched the edge of the paper. "You made this?" Henry nodded proudly. "I measured the land yesterday. There is enough room between the creek and the cottonwood trees." Clara watched Elias carefully. "It would be your place. No rent, no debt. No one could ask you to leave." Elias looked from the drawing to their hopeful faces. "I don't know what to say." "You do not have to answer now," Clara said. Henry leaned closer. "But you should answer soon, because I already promised Reverend Reed he could help build it." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You told the Reverend before asking me." "I was sure you would say yes." For the next several days, Elias avoided giving them an answer. He continued working around the ranch, helped Henry repair the corral, and taught 3 young ranch hands how to control a rope without frightening their horses. But every time he passed the cottonwood trees near Willow Creek, he imagined the small cabin standing there. The thought filled him with both comfort and fear. A cabin meant roots. Roots meant staying. And staying meant having something he could lose. On Sunday morning, wagons began appearing along the road to Carter Ranch. The first belonged to Reverend Reed. Behind him came the town carpenter, the blacksmith, several ranchers and families carrying food. Elias stood beside the barn in surprise. "What is all this?" Henry smiled. "The cabin." Elias turned toward Clara. "You planned this?" "Not exactly." Reverend Reed climbed down from his wagon. Word spread that an old cowboy needed a home. "I never said I needed one." The Reverend smiled. "Most proud men do not." A rancher named Nathan Cole unloaded fresh timber. "You repaired my saddle last month and refused payment." Another man carried a box of iron nails toward the creek. "You stayed all night with my mare when she was sick." A young ranch hand stepped forward. "You taught me how to ride without making me feel foolish." Rebecca Hayes arrived with her students, who carried small tools, food baskets, and bundles of kindling. She smiled at Elias. "My grandfather wrote that a good community appears before a person has to ask." Elias looked around the busy ranch yard. No one expected money. No one asked how long he would stay. They had simply come because they believed he belonged there. The work began beneath a clear blue sky. Men measured timber and raised strong wooden walls. Women prepared food beneath the trees. Children carried nails, swept wood pieces, and brought cups of water to the workers. Elias tried to help, but each time he lifted a board, someone took it from him. "This is your cabin," Nathan told him. "You are supposed to stand there and look grateful." "I am not good at standing still." "We know." By sunset, the frame stood proudly beside Willow Creek. Elias walked through the unfinished doorway. There was no roof yet, no windows, and no stone fireplace. Still, he could already see what it would become. Henry stood beside him. "The porch will face west, so you can watch the sunset." Elias looked toward the mountains. "You thought of everything." Henry smiled. "I learned from you." The community returned each day after finishing their own chores. Within 2 weeks, the cabin had sturdy walls, a sloped roof, glass windows, and a stone chimney. Clara sewed curtains from dark blue cloth. Rebecca brought a wooden shelf for books. The blacksmith made strong hinges for the door. Henry built a small table by himself. One leg was slightly shorter than the others, but Elias told him it was the finest table he had ever seen. Finally, the cabin was finished. On a warm spring evening, everyone gathered near the creek. Smoke curled gently from the chimney, and lantern light glowed through the windows. Reverend Reed handed Elias a small iron key. "You have spent enough years sleeping beneath the stars." Elias accepted it with trembling fingers. The people applauded as Henry opened the door. Inside stood a narrow bed, a rocking chair, a wooden dresser, a table, and a simple stove. Clara's blue curtains moved softly in the evening breeze. Above the fireplace hung a small wooden sign Henry had carved. "Elias Mercer's home." The letters were uneven, but Elias could not look away. Clara stepped beside him. "What do you think?" Elias swallowed hard. "It is more than I ever imagined." Henry smiled. "Then you will live here." Elias looked through the window toward the Carter ranch house. Warm light glowed from its kitchen. Ranger stood beside Copper near the corral. The sound of laughter drifted across the yard. He turned toward the cabin again. It was beautiful. It was safe. It belonged to him. But something felt wrong. The next morning, Clara found Elias sitting alone on the cabin porch. The key rested in his open hand. She sat beside him. "You did not sleep here." "No." "Is something wrong with the cabin?" "Nothing." "Then why did you return to the spare room?" Elias looked toward Willow Creek. "I spent most of my life believing home was a piece of land or a roof that no one could take away." Clara waited. "But last night I stood in that cabin and realized I was still alone. You would only be a short walk from us." "I know." His voice became quieter. "But I did not return to this valley because I wanted a building." He looked at her. "I returned because of you and Henry." Clara's eyes filled with emotion. Elias closed his hand around the key. "The cabin is the kindest gift anyone has ever given me. But if you will still have me, I would rather keep sleeping in the ranch house." Clara smiled through her tears. That room was never prepared for a visitor. Elias frowned slightly. "What was it prepared for?" "Family." That evening, Elias spoke to Henry beside the pasture fence. The boy listened, as the old cowboy explained that he wanted the cabin to remain part of the ranch. "What will we use it for?" Henry asked. Elias looked toward the small schoolhouse in the distance. "Travelers who have nowhere to sleep, young ranch hands who need a start, anyone who needs time to find their way." Henry thought about it. "So it can still be a home?" "Yes. Just not only yours." Elias placed one hand on the boy's shoulder. "That is the best kind of home." Several weeks later, Carter Ranch held its annual spring gathering. Families from Meadow Ridge arrived with wagons filled with food, instruments, and children. Long tables stood beneath the cottonwood trees. Music filled the air while horses grazed peacefully beyond the fence. As the sun began to lower behind the mountains, Henry stood and tapped a spoon against his cup. The talking slowly stopped. "I want to say something," he announced. Clara looked at her son with surprise. Henry held a folded sheet of paper. "When my father died, I thought our family would always have an empty place." The yard became silent. Clara lowered her eyes. Henry continued, "I learned that no one can replace the people we lose, but that does not mean our hearts have to stay empty forever." He turned toward Elias. "Sometimes a family grows when someone chooses to stay." Elias stared at him. Henry unfolded the paper and carried it across the yard. Written at the top were the words Carter Family Record. Beneath them were Clara Carter and Henry Carter. One empty line remained. Henry placed the paper on the table and handed Elias a pen. "We want you to add your name." Elias' weathered hands began to shake. He looked toward Clara. She nodded gently. The old cowboy bent over the paper. Slowly and carefully, he wrote Elias Mercer on the empty line. When he finished, Henry wrapped both arms around him. Clara joined them. For several seconds, Elias could not speak. He had survived storms, cattle drives, dangerous rivers, and lonely winters. Yet nothing had prepared him for the simple feeling of being held by people who did not want him to leave. The neighbors applauded. Rebecca wiped tears from her face. Reverend Reed smiled. As darkness settled across the valley, lanterns glowed around Carter Ranch. Children laughed beside the creek, music continued near the porch, and smoke rose from the cabin built for anyone who needed a place to begin again. Elias stood near the ranch gate and looked toward the trail that had carried him across half the country. For most of his life, every road had led him away from something. This road had finally brought him back. He removed his old black hat and looked at Clara and Henry waiting on the porch. Then he walked toward the ranch house. His saddle remained inside the tack room. His tin cup hung beside the fireplace. His name rested beside theirs on the family record. The old cowboy had returned carrying everything he owned, believing he had nowhere else to go. But he had not come back because the trail had ended. He had come back because he had finally found the one place he never wanted to leave. This time, Elias Mercer had come home to stay.